think one of the things that um, I've done is give myself permission to extract myself from any sense of like cultural conditioning that has anything to do with being nice or being attractive or telling the truth. I mean, honestly, like when I meet someone who is a stranger, particularly if I'm not thinking, oh, this, I think I'm going to have a very pleasant conversation with this person. If I get any of those sort of nervous system triggers, I give myself permission to lie. I give myself permission to have snot all over my face,
Yeah,
to
good.
to do whatever I need to do to prioritize my safety.
All right, welcome everyone to the Cycling with Virtual Summit and our panel discussion in response to the Man or Bear debate. My name is Annalisa, and I'm the organizer of the summit. Before I begin, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Ortlieb and Bedrock Sandals, as well as my Patreon supporters for making this summit possible. If anyone has any questions during the talk itself, you can just drop them in the chat. And just be sure to specify if you'd like to ask the question yourself or if you'd like me to ask it for you. We'll have like a little bit of time at the end to take questions. I'm just going to do a brief introduction of everyone and then we'll get into it. Laura Killingbeck has cycled, hiked, hitchhiked, and sailed tens of thousands of miles. Along the way, she works from the wild as a freelance writer and visual storyteller. Her work has been featured in Bicycling Magazine, Adventure Cyclist, and bikepacking.com, where she's written the article that we're talking about today about her response to the man or bear debate. Natalie Corbett is the first documented transgender woman to bike the Pan American Highway from Alaska to Argentina. In 2021, she wrote an essay for Bicycling Magazine about her experiencing cycling south after her lowest low. She is driven to bicycle travel for its constant surprise, connection to the earth and the people. Stephanie Puello is an assistant professor at the University of Miami in public administration. She is the first documented Black woman to have completed the 50-year-old Transamerica Bicycle Trail. Following her trip, she founded and led the Denver chapter of Black Girls Do Bike. Stephanie writes in Adventure Cycling, as straightforward as it is to ride a bike, it is much more difficult to overcome the apprehension of entering a world that does not expect you in it. And lastly, Janie Hayes is a social change communications consultant, trained end-of-life doula, mindfulness coach, and ultra-endurance cyclist. She has raced the Tour Divide and the Trans Am bike race twice, placing third overall in 2017, even after a nasty dog bite. I actually first met Janie like very briefly when I was touring the Trans Am and she was racing it in 2017 and we like crossed paths. Um, Today, she's less focused on going fast and setting records and more interested in how endurance sports can keep our minds flexible and our hearts generous, no matter what life brings. So with that, I just wanted to welcome everyone to the summit, and I'll let you guys take it away. I'll end my video and I will see you on the other side.
Hi. Thank you so much, Annalisa. Um, so I'd like to start by just saying how honored I am to be part of this panel. I think this is just an epic group of people, and I'm really excited to see where the conversation goes. So that what we're talking about today is the man versus bear debate. And so just to give a little recap on that, last year there was a TikTok debate in which someone asked women on the street whether they would rather be stuck in the forest with a man or a bear. And most of the women responded that they would rather be stuck in the forest with a bear. And so this inspired a lot of social debate about gender roles, safety, what it means to be female in the world. And there was a lot of both positive responses as well as negative responses. A lot of women expressed I think a certain amount of relief at being able to tell their truth about having certain fears based on male violence or the threat of male violence or fear of male violence. And then within that debate, there were a significant number of men who also expressed a lot of anger at being told that women might not feel so comfortable with them. So in response to this TikTok debate, I ended up writing a story for bikepacking.com about my own experiences as a solo female cyclist who's encountered a lot of bears as well as a lot of men out in the wild. And I talked about, you know, the kind of gray area that I personally can experience when I'm a solo female cycling or hiking out in the forest. The gray area of not always knowing exactly what someone's intention is or what their response to me will be. And it opened up a larger conversation about what it means to um, have autonomy as a female person, have agency and freedom to move through the world on your own, as well as the reality of how we need to keep ourselves safe. Um, and also opening up that conversation, hopefully to include men in that conversation and how men think and feel and how we can kind of grow and change the course of this conversation together. So today we're talking about that. We're talking about gender and cycling. And I just wanted to start by opening it up to everyone on the panel. When you first heard about the man versus bear debate, how did that feel to you? Did you have any reactions to it? Like, did it mean anything to you personally?
I personally don't TikTok, so I think I came to the man versus bear pretty late in the game. Um, but my first reaction was like, yeah, that makes sense. I would, choose a bear as well. I've encountered many bears, and I find it's a lot more like it's easier to predict what a bear will do in a lot of situations. Like when you encounter a black bear, there's like a few set of rules that you can do. Make yourself big, loud, throw things at them. You know, if it's, brown, lie down. If it's white, say goodnight. At least you know if a polar bear is coming, you're just done. But with men encountering, like on my travels, I've had a numerous instances where it's like, what is going to happen right now? Like, am I safe? Are they going to react? And so when the man versus bear debate really, I guess, exploded into the non-TikTok world where I encountered it, I thought it was good to have people like having this discussion and trying to see different people's points of views that you might not normally think of in the wider world.
I think I was actually introduced to this topic through your article, Laura. So I kind of had to then follow the thread back to see what the TikTok conversation had been like. And I had a lot of mixed feelings from my personal experience. One, I thought it was so fascinating that that conversation framed in that way really seemed to hit a collective nerve.
Yeah.
And I realized that my perspective was really shaped by my experience and the fact that I feel generally safe in nature And I also realized that I feel safe around a lot of men because of um, how I grew up and who entered my life. And I feel fortunate for that. And I also very much resonated with the broader systemic implications of how other women were feeling, whether they don't feel safe in nature, whether they don't feel safe around men. Um, and it just got me thinking about how, we have we had have sort of shared cultural systems um, that often manifest in oppression. And we also have personal experiences. And part of my challenge has been sort of holding the paradox of both of those realities.
Holding the paradox of kind of the systemic as well as the personal, like the reality
Yeah.
versus what you're actually experiencing.
Yeah. And I thought you actually did a really good job of laying that out in your article as well. And it was one of the things that resonated with me the most.
Thank you. Yeah, it's complicated.
Hmm.
It's complicated, and what you were saying about feeling safe in nature, I think that's another one of those interesting pieces where some people feel safe in nature, some people don't immediately based on their background or what they've been
Mhm.
exposed to. And so for someone like me who grew up camping, being able to go into nature is calming. It's like, oh, this is where I feel free. But it's not that way for everyone. And so there's so many layers of nuance in that conversation.
Um, I uh I feel like I um resonate with what you just shared, Janie, because I think that was my experience too of just kind of wrestling with the realities of my own experience versus more kind of systematic factors. And yeah, the so I, like Natalie, learned, I think I learned about the conversation way after the fact, after it had already waned. And I'm not a TikToker either. I think I saw conversations happening on Twitter, but um, interestingly, perhaps interestingly, I don't know, I had no real reaction to it. And to me, I had to, I guess, after the fact, just sit with the fact that the answer to me was very clearly man, that I would choose a man over a bear. And that's like, it's just interesting how it isn't necessarily because of particularly good experiences with men as much as it's that, kind of being settled in the fact that I already have to exist with men, right? That I, like, the reality behind, you know, the uncomfortable reality about like how widespread the fear of male violence is, right? And like that being so constant that it almost doesn't, it barely registers anymore. Um, it's almost like quiet acceptance, right? But like, not that I'm truly accepting it, it's just more like that's the tragedy of it. Um, and to me, like, there's a level to which like hypervigilance is almost like part of my livelihood, right? Like hypervigilance is almost like synonymous. Like it isn't actually, but it feels like hypervigilance is like synonymous with womanhood to me. Um, and I think because of that, there's a level to which bears, I feel like I have no, particularly because I haven't necessarily encountered them very often, but in camping or anything like that. But also, it's like I feel like bears, I have no real strategy to deal with. Whereas, unfortunately, I have had to learn, as most women do, um, how to survive in a world with men in them, right? And like, and live in a world where men obviously have more power, and where men disproportionately cause more harm. So it's like by virtue of knowing I have to like exist with that, to me it's like it, I guess like for me it was almost like, I don't know, I guess it's better to deal with the devil you know than the devil you don't, you know.
Wow. I there's so much there in what you just said. There's really so much there. I think part of um one of the interesting things about this conversation overall is that, like you said, we are living in a world where we're in contact with men all the time. And statistically, that kind of stranger danger of like, oh, I'm going to go in the forest and a man is going to come get me, that stranger danger is just incredibly rare. Whereas sexual harassment and gender-based violence in our common lives very is common. It's not rare at all. And so I'm hearing you say that, Stephanie, that like this is because of that kind of exposure. It's like you're kind of like a fish in water, like the, the water is gender dynamics, or any of those social dynamics. And so because you're exposed to it constantly, it sounds like you've developed a lot of your own skill sets for well, would you say like feeling safer or being safer or just managing kind of what's happening to you?
I think managing is a good,
Uh,
yeah, it's like yeah, it's, I guess, just kind of learning how to manage and navigate, you know, all the layered risks. And I think to your point, it's like part of it is context, and it's, you know, thinking particularly in that very specific hypothetical of, you know, being in a forest. It's like obviously it's a hypothetical and it's like encouraging like broader conversation, but to me it's like, you know, yeah, just that is not something that I necessarily encounter every day, right? Like, so even as common as violence is, I don't necessarily wake up with the assumption like, oh, I'm probably going to be the victim of violence today in the same way. Um, and even that, I think there's a lot to it because there's like the racialized component too for me, and almost kind of going back to what Janie said too, it's like about personal experience as compared to like systematic, right? And I think being, for example, now married to a man and the certain level of safety that I feel with that, I think also colors like my experience in a way. I think compared to prior to being married and also just being younger, like I feel like most of the violence that I have experienced both directly and indirectly at the hands of men came when I was younger. So I also wonder to some degree if I had been asked the same question, I don't know, 15 years ago, if my response would be different. Um, but yeah, to your question, I think it's more of a managing and navigating
mm,
thing, you know, um, and also just like what is most salient for me, um, and how I kind of understand or almost like negotiate safety.
mm, mhm. So that's something you've become familiar with, and yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
I was curious, Natalie, what are your thoughts on that? Because you mentioned kind of that gray area too, like on your travels, not exactly knowing. Do you feel like there's something similar happening with you in terms of like you're managing situations? There's sort of like an emotional toll, or some kind of experience of management that you're doing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. you're constantly making decisions, whether I'm constantly either consciously or unconsciously doing it by what you are encountering out in the world. And it's trying to find a balance between like your comfort and your desire to go about your trip in this manner. And there have been times where like I had a really dangerous encounter with a couple men on a mountain road, and I didn't know if I was going to get out of that. And so for about the next like week, I did not camp. I just like hostel to hostel to hostel because I was like, I just need to have the private security of a locked door for my safety. And then there are other times where do you want to deal with, whatever local wildlife? Like it's always a balancing act. And I don't think there's like one right or wrong answer. It's however you feel the most comfortable in that situation is what's right for you at that moment.
Yeah. And Janie, what do you think? Like, what is your take on that, on kind of like the management that happens on like either while cycling or on a daily basis? Is that something you have or something that you think about?
Yeah, I think Stephanie described it as like a hypervigilance. And then you also in your article, I think when you describe sort of the set of conscious and unconscious systems that kick in when you do meet a man, out in the backcountry, I think it's not dissimilar from how we relate in everyday life.
Yeah.
That there's this sort of there's this subconscious set of reflexes, if you will, that kick in. And I do think I like that Stephanie said hypervigilance, because I do feel like um, that is a common and very understandable form of conditioning, especially for us as women in this culture that we share. And I think it's useful, and it can also be a prison. Again, it's a paradox that I think we have to hold. And the trick, I think, is being able to bring enough awareness to what is happening and what our reactions are, and where those reactions are coming from. And I think for me, like one of the really interesting things that has happened for me around cycling and gender dynamics has been from doing really long trips and racing where there's just a lot of time to think about these things. I think you all probably have had similar experiences. And I think that's a real gift to be able to have an interaction and then have a lot of time to reflect on it. And I feel like that's one of like the greatest benefits of this, like spending time out by ourselves or with others, is the ability to think, to have an experience and then reflect upon what it means and how it's situated within our lives. So one of the things that I noticed for myself is that when I will just use like, bike trips or racing, I feel a lot more hypervigilant when I get near towns, because that is usually where I will encounter other humans, although looming in my mind is more the question of what are the men going to be like that I encounter. And most of the long distance racing that I've done has been in not urban areas. And I feel like that's a sort of rural America is a different world in many ways. And so there might be a different set of encounters that I will be preparing myself for there, as opposed to like an urban environment. And again, like these are all categories, like shortcuts that my brain does, right? That are maybe more or less true, but are conditioned by my own experience. And so my experience so far has been that when I'm in the most remote areas, I have the least disturbing encounters. And when I am near human civilization, I have more disturbing encounters. But I think this hypervigilance kind of kicks on for each one of us, like, again, in different situations based on our experiences. And it's, if we can, again, like, be really curious about that, then I think that we have a lot to learn, and maybe some ways of thinking about how we can use our conditioning to empower ourselves, and also put some chinks in these sort of systems of oppression like patriarchy that we all, like you said, swim in like fish.
Okay, there's so much there. There's so much there. I'm so glad you talked about that time factor, because one of the questions that I often get from people is like, well, how do you learn to do that management? Like what Stephanie was talking about, like managing the situation, managing fear or the threat of something. And I think for me, because I started traveling when I was 18, I started doing long distance trips as a teenager. I hitchhiked for a year across the US and Mexico. And that was kind of when I started having to learn about how to protect myself, how to navigate situations with people, but particularly with men. And I do that, and I learned kind of like a system for that. So basically, what would happen is if I ever had a situation where I felt uncomfortable for any reason, um, and I do this on the bike still. So let's go back to the cycling because that's what our forum is about. So if I'm on the bike and I have a situation with someone who is making me feel uncomfortable, and I exit that situation on the bike, I pedal away, um, I will spend the next hour, as soon as my body calms down, as soon as I go back to that calm space, I will analyze every single aspect of that interaction from the very first moment I saw that person, everything they said, everything I did. I will pinpoint every single piece. And then I will kind of analyze how my body feels in response to that. And I'll start to kind of form sort of I think a stronger sense of instinct for like looking at what were the points that I could have seen that maybe something was going to go wrong, or what were the points that I could have paid more attention to, and then kind of like really embed that knowledge in my body as I bike away for hours. And I feel like that system of like deep analysis while I'm in motion, while I feel safe, has been a really powerful way to improve that management skill and also learn to do things like exit quickly. Like the second like one of those like very specific points gets hit, then it's like, all right, I'm out of here in this next situation. I'm not going to stay around and find out what happens. I'm going to leave. And so things like that. And so I'm curious for other people, like, do you have systemic ways of kind of training yourself um, to stay calm in difficult situations? Do you have ways of how do you actually go about the management of a situation? So, like, if you are in that position of, okay, I am actually in the forest. I've met a man, and there's some behavior that he's doing that's making me uncomfortable. How do you manage that, or how do you learn to manage that?
Mhm.
I guess how I learned to manage it was through trial and error. I come at it from a different point of view where I lived a good 25 years of my life presenting as male. So I wasn't raised with the, for lack of a better word, like the baggage or the societal weight of like cis women who learn from a very young age to protect themselves, as far as I know, from like dangerous situations, like where men could be, you know, overpowering you. And I come about it by, I'm a very conversational person, and so I like to just talk with the person and like get to know them, and while withholding, um, I guess, details that could be like detrimental to my safety later on. Like, so where are you going? I will is something that people often ask, and I will just be vague and leave it open ended, so that way I can go many different directions and it still is the truth. You know, lie by omission type of conversation. Um, Also, kind of defer in a way, and just try and extricate myself from the situation and let them go first if possible.
Mm.
Which is easier to do on bikes than with like when you're hiking in the woods, because you just go a lot slower when you're on foot. But with biking, at least you're able to speed away a little bit easier.
So it was kind of like that repetitive process of being in lots of different situations that you sort of learned
Mhm.
to talk with people in a way that kind of protected yourself and protected your freedom in a way.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of a good way to look at it. And I do similar to you. Like after each one of my encounters, like I still replay a lot of them to this day. Just like, what can I do in the future? What could I have done differently in this situation? Because like if you don't analyze past experiences, you're not going to grow.
Yeah. I feel like that's actually one of the keys for women for gaining that confidence and gain to be able to do especially solo journeys is to be able to replay things and learn from them and take every situation as a possible learning experience. And so that's what I've recommended to other women who haven't been solo cycling before is like think about your life as it is now. Think about any situations you've had with men that have made you uncomfortable and just think through every step in that process, what that was like, how you felt, and see what you can learn from that and what you could do differently to make yourself either feel or actually be safer if that happened again.
I think one of the things that um, I've done is give myself permission to extract myself from any sense of like cultural conditioning that has anything to do with being nice or being attractive or telling the truth. I mean, honestly, like when I meet someone who is a stranger, particularly if I'm not thinking, oh, this, I think I'm going to have a very pleasant conversation with this person. If I get any of those sort of nervous system triggers, I give myself permission to lie. I give myself permission to have snot all over my face,
Yeah,
to
good.
to do whatever I need to do to prioritize my safety. So that means like all of those, yeah, conditioning things that we might have as women as we go through the world, those go out the window, and I play a different role. And a lot of times that includes, at least initially, looking someone directly in the eye, speaking very clearly. Sometimes I lower my voice,
Yeah.
the tone of my voice, and yeah, I never really thought this through until you asked the question, but now that you asked the question, I realize, oh, I have all kinds of ways of engaging in that management
Yeah.
process, which maybe I haven't thought about it because I'm not necessarily proud of it, but I like the way that you framed it, that it is actually like a coping technique in a way that makes me feel, at least have the perception of safety, which is important, even the perception of safety.
Yeah. I think we all have management techniques because throughout our lives, it's just normalized that there is a threat of something. Like, when you're told to like not go to your car alone at night, when you're told to have your keys out, when you're told to only travel with, in groups or with other women. I mean, the other part of that sentence is because there's a threat of sexual assault. Like, it's just like we leave out that part of the sentence. And so it's just this like normal thing that we're all used to, but that is part of I think a larger mental, emotional, physical landscape of management. Um, Stephanie, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I feel like I have a lot of disordered thoughts though. Kind of to your point, Janie, it's like as the question was asked, like a lot of things started, certain things are starting to register. And so sorry if this seems a little convoluted in a way, but to what Natalie shared earlier, and in general, as I'm hearing you all talk, I'm realizing that I am very rarely outdoors alone anyway. So to some degree, I feel like I have a response to this, and in other ways, I feel like I don't. And then it's kind of made me think, and again, in a way that may seem tangential, of like the way that I think about the outdoors and what you shared earlier, Laura, that you were talking about, that the outdoors is a sense, like that is like peaceful for you, or like that's where you go to, where do you get a more sense of like freedom or sense of safety, whereas that's not what I grew up, because I didn't grow up camping or going outdoors all that much outside from like the beach here in Miami. I don't equate the outdoors with safety, quite the contrary. So I think I'm realizing now, as you all were talking, that most of the cycling and anything that I've done outdoors, I either do with my husband or somebody. And to me, that's just, in my mind, I would have thought that that was just happenstance. And or that it was partially because I am very communal, and for me, the outdoors should be something to be enjoyed with others. But now I'm also kind of thinking and almost like psychoanalyzing. It's like, is it because I'm communal, or is it because I've equated it with a lack of safety? I don't think I've ever thought about it like that, but I'm curious if there is something about that. And kind of to this point about like how I manage it, again, I guess I haven't been in terribly too many situations um, where I've had to think about, yeah, because it's almost like my husband is almost like a crutch, and we are so often, when I'm outdoors, I have so often been with him, and when I bike, it's also so often been with him, that it's almost like I immediately just kind of assume to some degree that I'm safe, because if something were to happen, he would just be there. And not only because he's a man, but also just like safety in numbers and that kind of sense, even if it's perceived safety as opposed to actual safety. But to another extent, then I just think about it, just being alone generally, whether it's cycling or outdoors or otherwise. But I think that I've just learned to, yeah, I think it's essentially what you all described, that it just kind of depends on the context, right? Like there are times where just immediately leaving the situation is one answer, and um, uh, I can be very abrasive. So, kind of like either rising to their level, or on the contrary, trying to, kind of self-regulate and then try to kind of diffuse the situation, if that is a possibility. It isn't always, yeah, I think it just depends on what, and also again, like the hypervigilance, like I almost put, unfortunately, I feel like I've learned to put the onus on myself. There's a level to which I just, because historically black women aren't given like grace and like a sense of safety or a sense of like security. I feel like I've just grown to take on that burden myself, of like, it's my job to keep myself safe because nobody else will. So, or whether it's turning my back every second, to make sure, kind of like assess the environment, assess who's around me. Frankly, there's a lot of times where I think to myself of like, oh, I feel safe because he looks like like I can outrun him. um, or things like that, right? Like there's a lot of different things that I feel like I try to calculate in my head too. But anyway, I'll stop there.
Wow. Um, yeah, again, there's so much. I feel like every time someone speaks, it just brings up so many things for me. Like it just there's so much there. I want to make sure we touch back on that safety in nature versus not safety in nature at some point. Before we go there, I do want to, I'm curious about the other specific things that people are doing in terms of management. So, um, Janie, you said it's like you play a different role, I think, when in management, like you don't like there are times when you like speak differently or act differently, playing a different role is maybe not as like stereotypically feminine or something. I'm curious about that because I noticed myself changing my voice on a trip was a few years ago. I was biking around Eastern Canada on my own, and I noticed that I changed my voice to be either like lower and gruffer with certain men, and then with other men, I changed my voice to be like a little higher and like lighter. And it depended on the perceived relationship. So if there was someone that I felt like I needed to set like a very clear boundary with, my voice would go down like this. You know, like I was just like real straightforward, real direct. And then if it was someone that I was like, oh, maybe this person might help me, maybe this person might be offer me some water, then I would go into that kind of hyper feminine, like, "Oh, hi, well," you know? And I don't know, is this normal? Am I doing a normal thing, or is this something other people do? What we're code switching? What is how do you feel about this?
I mean, I have a lot of different feelings about that. I resonate with it. I'm not proud of it. um, I think that it is again, and like when we see ourselves doing those kind of things, and yes, I'm with you. I've noticed myself doing the same things. Again, it's an opportunity, which often being out in nature, I think can give us that reflection opportunity to realize how many roles we play and to wonder why. And I mean, that we could get very existential and trippy about this, but where my mind goes is like, then, that's the whole question of like, what is the self? Like, who are we?
Yeah.
Are we these different roles that we play? Are we something more, something less? But I do find it's fascinating to watch ourselves. And again, back to the awareness, like bringing awareness to what we do and what we're trying to either get or to protect in any given moment, and how we change our behavior, our voices, our where we're looking. Another thing I notice that I do when I have that sense that maybe I'm not safe is I speak in very clipped sentences. And I also try to summon a sort of physical strength, that my shoulders are more back, I stand more upright. Some of these things I wish were things that I brought into my everyday roles. So I think there's something to learn. And yeah, I don't think I have anything more to say about that, except that I'm with you, and this all sounds very conditioned, which I think it is.
Yeah. Natalie, I see you nodding your head. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can totally relate to when you're in that situation, especially like just short like sentences, phrases that are unambiguous. You're like, just nope, absolutely not. Yep, yep. And you're just like making yourself big, which is not something that came naturally to me as a child. Um, I never wanted to get into fights as a kid, even though I was like heavily bullied. I just didn't fight back. It just wasn't in my nature. But then I did something questionable when I was trying to like tamp down my gender identity. I did what a lot of trans people do, and they hypermasculinate. And like, what's the most manly thing I could do? I joined the Marines. I do not support the capitalist war machine, not at all. But from that, I also gained a lot of confidence. So when I am in a situation like that where I do feel threatened by people, I know I can hold my own in a situation, and I feel like I also have a pretty good bark to go along with the bite, which that really does help, but it also won't get you out of all situations. It can only go so far. But with that, I have been able to like, stand my ground and like kind of stare down the lion or whoever, metaphorical lion or the metaphorical bear, and have them leave without an altercation.
Do you feel like that's your go-to, like the thing that's most effective for you is to kind of take that stance of strength and boundary setting? Is that what works most?
Um, in some situations, yeah, I don't think it's a one size fits all. It's one tool in my tool belt, and I just there's no panacea for it. It's you have to assess what situation you're in and adapt your skills to meet that moment.
Yeah. Stephanie, did you have anything to add to that? And kind of just going around.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just, yeah, to kind of what I said earlier is just, and I guess to repeat what Natalie just said, but yeah, I just kind of assess the current situation and kind of go from there. I think the idea of a toolbox is kind of exactly it. And I guess I'm sitting here thinking that there are like survival mechanisms that you almost just inherit. Like I realize that there are certain things that my mom has like explicitly told me, and then there are other things that I think you just tacitly kind of pick up or just like understand. Um, right. So I feel like things that she told me were more based on like, if you go to a club, like you don't leave your drink alone, right? Like things like that. But things like, walk really fast if there's someone behind, she's never told me that, but I do it if I feel like I need to, right? But I think there's just certain things that just come with existing with, all the layered identities that you just kind of learn how to manage them, or live with them to some degree. And yeah, and I think it's kind of, again, not to repeat everything you already said, but um, whether it's the, change your voice, whether it's, kind of whether you're short, if I feel any kind of sense of danger, I definitely try to come off as like uninterested in what the person is saying. Like, I'm not entertaining this conversation. Right. And yeah, things like that that I unfortunately just have kind of learned to do. And I think part of yeah, to I guess the idea of like hypervigilance is that is such a burden of just having to think about it all the time. But I think part of it at the same time is that sometimes I feel, especially as it relates to the outdoors, um, and to the whole manor bear, like in that hypothetical, in that context, I think that part of why I haven't given that as much thought to is because when I think of gendered violence, I think about that happening and like the truth of the matter being, especially when it relates to anything regarding sexual assault, is that the people we should probably most fear are probably people who are closer to us, right? Like most sexual assault um, uh, is done by people or someone that's close to you, family, whatever, friends. So I think because I think of violence in that way, it's sometimes harder to think about it happening just randomly, right? I don't think about, oh, if I go camping, I'm probably going to be sexually assaulted, right? That could absolutely happen, but if I was going to think about that, I would think about that more of like it could be someone that I know and trusted, and that is way more likely to be the case than, if I'm out camping or hiking or something like that. At least again, I speak solely for myself and my personal experience, but
Well, I think statistically that's completely true across the board, that sexual assault is usually happening with someone you know or and have know in some capacity. And so I
mm-hmm,
do think that that is a really valid point in this conversation too. Like when women are asking, is it safe for me to bike alone? Is it safe for me to camp alone? Is it safe for me to hike alone? It's like really the question is it safe for me to be female? Is it safe to be
mm-hmm,
a woman? And the answer to that question is really complicated. Statistically, we know that it's not always safe to be female. It's there is a truth to the fears that women have, and at the same time, I think there is a case to be made that it's like one of the safest things you can do is go out and camp by myself as a woman. Like that's like where I feel the safest, and so I think like that's one of the challenges in this conversation, though, for the entirety of the man bear conversation for me is like how do we talk about like the reality of that hypervigilance, the reality of the management that we're always doing, and also one not dissuade women from going out there and doing these things, and two, not demonize men entirely, because most of the time, the vast, 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 vast majority of the time that I do encounter men out in the wild, out in the forest when I'm hiking or biking, they're very nice people. Like they're very helpful, they're very friendly. I don't have that many problems. But sometimes I do. And so it's like you're taking that kind of risk assessment. Um, and that's one of the things I talked about in the story that I wrote is like most of the time I feel very comfortable with men when I'm out in the woods, when I'm out on my own. But every now and then there'll be like some little sign that that person might not listen to me, or they might not seem to be able to read discomfort, or they might not seem to care if they're making me uncomfortable. Those two things, like if they don't seem to care that something they're doing is making me uncomfortable, or if they don't seem to realize that something is making me uncomfortable, those are my two big like red flags where I'm like, okay, that hypervigilance starts now. Like I am now very alert and I am prepared to manage this situation 100% so that I can exit. Um, so yeah, going back to that conversation, like how do we talk about these things in a way that's realistic, um, helpful, and also still helps women to get out into the world and do these things that we have all been able to enjoy. Um, anyone have any answers for me on that? Because I
I'm really happy that you brought this up, Laura, because I do think that the the fear and management and hypervigilance is a reality for all women, and it's important to talk about. I think equally, if not more relevant to my experience, has been how actually being out in wild places uh, with men and women and all genders has allowed me to challenge my ideas of gender stereotypes and the roles that I play in the world in an extremely um, helpful way. And I think some of my most authentic relationships have been formed on the bike with men in a space that feels extremely safe and vulnerable. And I want to make sure that we don't lose that either. And again, that's my experience, but I would say, especially for, I have lots of complicated feelings about my own proclivities towards competition and racing. But when I first started racing, a big part of it was I wanted to race the boys. And bike pack racing is one of the few sports where all genders compete together, and there aren't the same sort of categories as in a lot of sports that I had been involved with in the past. And I just thought it was fun. It felt like a sense of freedom to me to race the boys, to use that as a benchmark in terms of like physical strength and speed. And of course there's ways that can be, that can be unhelpful as well. But in doing so, like, I have felt a sense of, I have formed relationships that have been so meaningful to me, and almost ungendered, if that word makes sense, like meeting human to human in a shared challenge or a shared struggle. And really, it's given me the opportunity to see beyond myself and to really, get to know others in a way that is not shaped like much of my everyday life feels like by these different roles that we play. So, if I just sort of tick back through thinking about relationships that I've formed and conversations that I've had, especially with men, 90% of them have been heart-opening experiences. And there have been a handful where I did not feel safe. And so again, back to the paradox thing, both things are true, but I want to make sure that I'm glad that you kind of steered the conversation in this direction, because I think it's important not to miss the promise of being out and having the opportunity to meet each other in spaces that are not as conditioned.
Yeah, because ultimately that's the goal, right? It's like the reason we would have these difficult conversations would be to come back to that place where we can meet person to person, where we can have heart-opening experiences. And I think at the core of the man-bear debate, even with all of the conflict that happened, that exploded across the internet, I think what people really want is to feel safe with each other. And so for women to feel safe around men, and I think to some degree for men to feel safe enough to open up to open up with a certain amount of vulnerability and connection that isn't always coded as masculine.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just like a lot going back and forth there. But I think, yeah, for me, it's like you're saying, that paradox or that balance of being realistic about the fear and also realistic about the benefit and the possibility of really positive connections. You know. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to that kind of that paradox, that how difficult it is to have these conversations in ways that are real but positive? What do you have anything else to help me out? I still need help.
I mean, I guess like what you were saying, like could be it was basically the duality of the patriarchy, how it will help some men, but it also in turn hurts all men as well as hurting people of all genders. It's an oppressive force that tries to put people into boxes, whether or not they want to or belong in those boxes.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think like that is the other part of this conversation. As soon as women start talking about patriarchy, I I want to be so clear that it's something that is harmful to everyone. Um, it closes off connection. It also closes off, I think, different parts of ourselves. I think in patriarchy, women are expected to close off a lot of our agency, a lot of our autonomy, a lot of our boundaries, boundary setting. And I think for men, men are often expected to shut off a lot of personal vulnerability, emotionality, having that full range of the emotional self. And so breaking that down, breaking patriarchy down, and being able to live, have a different kind of relationship is ultimately good for everybody, I think, as Natalie said.
I think this is I think this is good that we steered the conversation this way. And for me, because I was leading a group for Black women cyclists, like clearly I was trying to encourage their participation, right? So there's a level to which I think the way that I approached it is like, let's not be naive to like the realities, but let's also not um, but I think that you try to equip people to navigate certain, and still want to encourage them to like take these opportunities. And it's kind of like I kind of think about whenever there's like a plane crash and like people get nervous, and then someone always goes back to the stats of like you're actually you're more likely to get into a car accident than you are so it's kind of like the way that I think about it with the outdoors of like there's more of a likelihood that your boyfriend is more of a danger to you than someone that you might encounter on a hike. And that doesn't solve anybody's problem, to be clear, but it's just kind of for people to kind of balance that there is a risk and you should be aware of that risk and you should hopefully have ways of navigating that risk. But also hopefully that doesn't dissuade people from kind of taking these opportunities that would be beneficial to them in some way. And I think that there's like this isn't always true, of course, either, but I think there's like a self-selection thing that happens. And like one of you just mentioned, like vulnerability that I think about. There's an inherent vulnerability, I think, to a lot of outdoor recreation. I think cycling is inherently vulnerable for sure. Just, whether you're exposed to the elements or you're exposed to, maybe bears or wildlife or whatever, that I think that then makes me think of like why it is that maybe all of us would say that maybe 90-95% of the time we do feel comfortable outdoors. And I think that maybe that's also because like what type of men tend to want to be outdoors, right? And like when you consider the mental health benefits, like maybe they are people who already maybe might be like less disposed to want to harm anyone, because maybe they're also outdoors to feel a sense of peace, to feel a sense of calmness, to want to recreate, obviously, to want to maybe connect with other people, to just want to enjoy nature. So I feel like if I was trying to encourage a group of women or anyone to get outdoors, I feel like that's the kind of thing that I would try to emphasize so they wouldn't feel as potentially fearful, I guess, or try to like mitigate that fear to whatever extent I can. But obviously, there are tons of other things that might be factoring into their fear calculus, But I really do want to touch on the first thing you said, Laura, when as you were kind of setting up this prompt, and that's like I think this conversation is very often kind of framed in a very binary terms, right? Like that like men are the villains and women are the victims. And I think that that's a problem for a lot of reasons, partially because of what Natalie said of like patriarchy doesn't only affect men, but also or like women are not the only victims of patriarchy, but men themselves are as well. And I'm very happy to always point out that men are the problem. But at the same time, I think if we're really like being serious And we think kind of like systematically that I think that we need to think about, the systems and norms that encourage or enable and like sustain the idea that men cause harm, right? I think that the harm that men cause or disproportionately cause is a manifestation of those systems and norms, right? And I think that that's what we need to be like focusing on. And I feel like maybe this is what you were getting to, and I feel like that limits the scope of the conversation to like individual villains as opposed to kind of talking about it in a more like systematic way. And I do think that there needs to be a conversation, be it about the outdoors or otherwise, about like how men are socialized and into violence and into dominance and into aggression. And anyway, yeah, I think that that needs to be part of the conversation. And like, how do we encourage the men that get it too, right, to kind of be mentors and like and that kind of thing, but not only like individualize the issue, but also how we talk more broadly about how like things like vulnerability are like feminized, and
Yeah.
how men are taught to suppress emotions and all that kind of stuff. Like, how do we equip people of any gender with better tools so that we all feel safe or safer?
Yeah. I
That's
think
a
that
long-term process.
That's
That
what I'm
starts
talking.
with
Oh, long term. Yeah, right. Yeah, no,
like
it's yeah.
teaching
It's
children empathy in school and would go a long way. I guess that would also require funding education, but that's a whole different story.
yeah.
but it kind of isn't, right? Like, it's all
Yeah.
tied. It's like what we care about, and
Mhm.
like we either care about these things or we don't, and we invest in these things or we don't. And yeah.
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 And
And oh, sorry, go ahead, Laura.
oh, you go. Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna, yeah, just appreciate Stephanie for going back to that. And I think that it's so important that we recognize that this gendered system is horrifying for all of us. And we are, it seems like part of our sort of growing up process in the world needs to be taking accountability for the ways that that system has wronged all of us, and the ways that we have been taught to participate in it. And again, like taking responsibility for that, not as a way of shaming ourselves or berating ourselves, but in saying we have power to make a better world going forward. We may only have influence during this lifetime in the in our sort of concentric circles of influence, but we can do things differently. And I think we can watch ourselves, and we can watch the broader culture, and we can find ways at all the time of, like you're all saying, acknowledging the realities of fear and harm and danger and lack of safety, and also leaning into the places where we do sense authenticity and vulnerability and the ability to connect, as like human to human beyond this gender coding.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting responses that I get sometimes when I talk about feeling afraid as a female is sometimes my male friends will be like, "Well, I feel afraid too." And I think part of the socialization of patriarchy is that men are probably less likely to talk about those personal fears of actually being afraid of other men. Most statistically, most violence is male violence, but that male violence goes in all different directions. It's against women, it's against non-binary people, and it's against other men. And so male violence is affecting all of us. there's a lot of fears. There's a lot that I think men haven't felt comfortable talking about because of the pushback that men get on being vulnerable or being emotional. So like you're saying, I mean, I think it's just part of this larger picture of re-socializing ourselves. And I think the man-bear debate was a really interesting open door to that conversation. One of the reasons I ended up writing the story that I wrote was because it seemed like that the door had opened to this idea that women are afraid, but then the pathways seem to just like get shut down by um, it becoming this binary thing of men versus women. And I feel like for that conversation to move forward, um, we do need to understand that systemic piece of how people are socialized, how women are socialized, how men are socialized, how everyone is socialized, and kind of start to shift those roles, hopefully. And it's fascinating that this is so applicable to the cycling industry, to like to anyone, but specifically to cycling, because you have women, you know, cycling alone. You have people trying to navigate how to feel that sense of freedom. And I kind of want to move to that in this conversation now is, you know, we all love riding bikes. We all love being out there riding bikes. It's part of, for me, it's been a part of feeling the freedom of independent motion, of being able to get somewhere on my own, um, feeling that sense of agency and autonomy. I think Stephanie mentioned feeling that sense of being with people and like riding with people. And so one thing I want to ask is like, what is the best part of riding bikes to all of you? Like, what is it that you love about it? Why do you keep going back out there? And what drives you to do what you do?
I think for me, part of it is the sense of self-sufficiency that I have when I'm especially adventure cycling, because I almost entirely do that solo, like almost never with anyone else. And just when I am like in the middle of a mountain range somewhere, just biking and camping and, you know, filtering my own water, like I can do all this by myself. I am doing it by myself. And like there's just a level of peace and serenity when you know that you can take care of your needs and like you can just be there in that moment, no connection to the outside world. You are just some insignificant little speck on a blue dot in the cosmos, but in this one moment, it's just you. And for me, that is like the true joy of biking and adventure cycling.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with Natalie on that. Um, that sense of being an animal in the world, you know, on planet Earth at this particular moment in time is like just a pretty mind-blowing experience to have. And then, you know, for me, like the clarity and sort of absorption aspect of the methodical, rhythmic nature of cycling is like just very physically pleasant. And when I ride, I feel like my body and my mind and my spirit are all back together again.
I really like that. And I feel like I can, yeah, like resonate with that. And yeah, I would agree. I think that there's like two pieces of it for me. For me, part of it is like the community piece. And again, because it just so happens that the vast majority of the cycling that I've done, particularly because I came into it as an adult, has been with other people. And that has been like just very, very deeply affirming for me. Just because, again, I am like just a very community oriented person. And for me, I try to root everything that I do in just like bringing people in and just like shared experience and just kind of feeling like I can relate to people in multiple ways. And we're not just like cyclists, but we are whatever else, right? We're people, we're women, we're Black women, we're, whoever. Um, so I think that that has been just very, that and particularly through Black Girls Do Bike and cycling specifically with other Black women, I think that that was affirming in just a completely like transcendental kind of way of like together we feel like a sense of um like just kind of responding to everything that we've been denied, like in a more systemic kind of way, that it feels just very empowering, I guess. So the community aspect is part of why I love it. And to that, and it's funny anytime I talk about cycling, because to me, the bike has also, my experience with cycling has always meant that the bike is ancillary to the people, like the people are first and the bike comes second. But then also, yeah, the liberating part of it. Most people are surprised to hear me say that my favorite type of cycling is like urban cycling, biking in cities. I feel like you could really feel like the vibrance of the city when you are on a bike, and so that's like where I feel the most like agency and autonomy, and yeah, the idea that I'm powering my own movement and that kind of thing, um, and for me, I think I've struggled a lot with like a sense of deservingness and I feel and also like really like a narrow outlook, very like truncated aspirations, particularly when I was younger. So I think that cycling has like opened that up for me. It just has made me feel like it's freeing in a different way. Like it's like freeing me from these different kind of logics that I've been like taught to internalize. Um, so for me, that's like the best part of it. And again, it just so happens that it's cycling, but any venue that I think allows you to feel that, I think is, it's just like a gift. So.
Well, so far in this conversation, we've talked about the man or bear debate. We've talked about the reality of some of the fears that women face and the reasons for those fears. We've delved into some of the management techniques that we all use to manage that fear of gender-based violence and the reality of it while we're on the road. We've gone into some discussing, nature versus cities and that feeling of safety in nature. And we've gone back into, yeah, talking about the larger aspects of how patriarchy is socialized and why that can be so bad for everyone and why there are still some paths forward that we can create. And I like that we're kind of wrapping up with that sense of freedom on the bicycle and the reason why all of us love biking, love being out there. It seems to be related in some way to some type of freedom, um, which is really beautiful to hear. As we start to wrap up this conversation, is there anything lingering for people that we didn't touch on that you want to touch on? And or is there anything that you are working on doing, a trip or an organization you're working with that you'd like to talk about in terms of in relation to your path forward? Sorry, there's a lot of questions. You can
Laura, while we're here, I'd love to ask you, there were hundreds of comments and many different threads in response to your article. And I was just curious, I mean, I'm sure we could talk for hours about this, but, with the benefit of reflection now, what are some of the more interesting things that arose for you from that conversation, either expected or unexpected?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Yeah, well, I was thrilled, first of all, that bikepacking.com published that story. It was a little bit edgy. And so I guess at first I'd just like to say how grateful I am to them for publishing that story and for supporting it the whole way through. The team there was just extremely supportive in a way that I didn't expect. But they really stood up for that article. There were many comments. A whole range of commentary, but that story did end up getting picked up by a number of people who work in academia and who are writers. And so the writer Rebecca Solnit forwarded that story on her Facebook page, which led for it to be shared a lot more widely. And then a number of people did reach out to me about speaking and doing work with them. So I've had the opportunity to go and speak in the Netherlands, in Nebraska, in different places in the US. And I'm actually now preparing for a larger project with a credit union. So Community Financial Credit Union has a logo, which is a bear. And when the man or bear debate came out, they actually launched their own like program called Choose the Bear to work with women's organizations, particularly organizations that help women leave abusive relationships. So they started partnering with all of these women's organizations across the state of Michigan, and they are bringing me on to do a 2-month bike trip across Michigan. So I'll ride across the entire state and I will visit these different organizations that are working with women who are leaving abusive relationships. And together we're doing this initiative to end economic abuse. So one of the challenges that women face in abusive relationships is usually that physical or sexual abuse is often tied to control of resources and economic abuse. And so by um, creating policies and products that help women get a leg up and get back to that sense of financial agency and financial autonomy, this credit union is helping women to leave abusive relationships. And we're going to explore that with this 2-month bike ride. So I'm really excited to be working with them. A lot of different things have come out of that story and this in this debate, and it's been really interesting to see how everyone can sort of like take that conversation and apply it to whatever they are doing. Like a credit union can apply it to their very, very real community focused work. And so a lot has happened, and this is happening now. And I'm very grateful to be in conversation with this lovely group of people.
Awesome. What cool ripple effects.
Mhm.
Thanks for sharing that.
Does anyone else have anything that they want to add as we start to wrap up and Annalisa pops back on for questions?
I would just mention that I have been an endurance sports coach for many years now, and I kind of have been doing it on the side, and I'm kind of reinvigorating that business now. And I am most interested right now in working with people who have both who sort of want to are interested in how participating in endurance sports and setting and achieving physical and fitness goals can help them to make progress in their spiritual, emotional, and mental lives. So I'm trying to kind of bring together two, I guess, strands of coaching, which I guess you could kind of call like life coaching, although I don't really like that term, and fitness coaching, because that's something that's been so impactful for me is the resonance between, sports and my inner life, and how allowing those things to be sort of one iterative process has really helped me learn how to live a more meaningful life. So, my website will be up within the next couple of weeks. And I just encourage anyone to get in touch.
Fantastic. And so your website is the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, janiehayes.com. And yeah, my people can contact me through there.
Fantastic. All right. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for taking part in this conversation. It was really delightful to talk to all of you. I feel like I'm coming away learning a lot and having a lot more to think about. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing everything you shared. And yeah, I just really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Laura,
Yeah,
and thanks
appreciate all of
everyone.
It was
Thank
great being
you.
on this panel.
Oh, there she is.
you.
Hi guys. Thank you so
Mhm.
much for this discussion. It was really, I really enjoyed watching it. It was really fruitful. And I got like goosebumps hearing Natalie talk about like the self-sufficiency and like the peace that you get from bike travel. Since we're already at like an hour and a half, I figured maybe just a couple more questions. There was one person in the chat, the Stacer, who asked, I guess more like on the practical side of things, what are some things that you do to prepare for a ride in regard to safety? Do you carry maze or bear spray or perhaps a weapon? Does it depend on where you're riding? And where do you keep these items? If
Um,
anyone has anything to share.
yeah, it depends on where I'm riding. If I'm in black bear country, I don't bother with bear spray, but grizzly and polar bear, not that it's going to do anything to a polar bear, but it's the thought that counts. I'll keep bear mace, and when I did it, I just kept it strapped to the top of my front left pannier. It was easily accessible. When I'm riding around town, or honestly, when I go on my next tour, starting next week, I will just keep a knife on my person. I'm a trans woman, and it's scary, especially in rural places. And I've had a lot more issues in the past 6 months than I have in a long time. So yeah, I keep a knife on me.
You find it like, yeah, better for your peace of mind. Yeah, that makes
Definitely
sense.
for my peace of mind, and also like if something does happen, I will have some way of defending myself. Like just a few months ago, two trans women were beaten on the light rail downtown. So like it happens.
Mhm.
So donate to
Anyone
Trans
else?
Lifeline.
But what organization did you say?
Trans Lifeline.
A Trans Lifeline. I'll write it in the description. Yeah, with bear spray, it's kind of funny because it's like, yeah, you have to have it like accessible, otherwise there's no point in carrying it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And if
Make sure you
anyone,
point it downwind.
yeah, that's the other thing. It's
Mm.
like I'm always nervous that like in the actual moment, like you're gonna freak out, but yeah. Um, does anyone else carry anything or it's kind of like the same?
In bear country, I carry bear spray.
Yeah.
But other than that, I guess I feel like I try to stay calm, and also I am always mentally prepared to defend myself if I need to. So it's
Mhm.
always something I'm aware of.
Yeah, I've only ever had bear spray on the Trans Am. Um, and otherwise, I have never had any kind of weapon of any kind.
Yeah, with the
Which is
Trans Am,
now,
it's more like it's more dog spray that they tell you to carry.
yeah. Yeah, and we did have something like that. I forget if it was spray or what it was when we were in Kentucky, but otherwise, yeah, no, I've never had, um, again, I don't know if it's a safety and numbers thing. I just, yeah, never had a weapon and never thought about it either, which probably a conversation for another time, but probably a good one too. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember like crossing into Kentucky on the Trans Am and it just being like a switch. Like there were just suddenly like you just heard dogs barking
Oh,
constantly.
yeah. I thought people
Yeah.
were overstating that, and I had a very close call, and if it weren't for a logging truck that was going the other way, I think I probably would have gotten bit pretty bad.
I have a few holes in my panniers from some dogs in the Andes.
Oh, in the Andes, is that also, it happens a lot there?
I mean, I had it more so in Mexico, but these were just like guard dogs in rural Colombia, and they decided that they didn't like me and my bike.
I know that with Janie, like when she was doing the Trans Am in 2017, it was like crazy because the first, second, and third place winners like all got bitten by the same dog in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. I still have that hole in
Jeez.
my leg to remind me.
Um,
And I think that, I know we're trying to wrap up here, but this really does another important element of all of this is like, to what level do we also understand that like chaos and uncertainty are part of the game? And sometimes there's just nothing that you can do. And that risk is actually, I think, part of what is intriguing for us about adventuring.
I think
Can you overcome the unknown?
the story you wrote for Radovis, Janie, was so good. When you talk about like the dog bite and that trip, and I would definitely recommend that article to anyone.
Thank you.
And just, yeah, if I can just ask one more question. We talk a lot about like safety. I'm wondering if you guys can recall like a moment on your bike that you just kind of felt the most free, like in any sense of the word, or that you just didn't have to really worry about your safety. If any moment comes to mind.
There's so many. I think I in 2023 I rode the Great Divide, and there was a moment when I had to cross a really long area that was um without a lot of water. And so I decided to do it at night. And I remember that first night, going out and not knowing what to expect. And it was so dark out there that I just looked up and saw, just the most beautiful stars. And it turned this experience that had been a little scary for me into something really beautiful. And I think that that's something that happens a lot on the bike, where you're going forward into an unknown, and that unknown becomes something very beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's hard to pick too, but when Laura was talking, I was remembering one time riding through Idaho through this river canyon, and it was a full moon, and I was on one side of the river and there was a sheer rock wall on the other side. And the way the moon was, it was reflecting my shadow onto the rock wall. And I kind of rode with my shadow for hours and hours on this sort of slight descent. And it was just such a beautiful, like it's just so evocative for me in my memory. It was such a feeling of freedom and beauty and non-separateness. Yeah, I feel really lucky to have experienced that.
Was that Lolo National Forest?
No,
Like
it
that,
was
no.
I think it was somewhere near Riggins.
Mm. Oh yeah, I thought that was, but I have a photo on my wall like from that same kind of area.
Oh
It says
yeah,
like
yeah.
winding road, next 99 miles. Like my
Oh
favorite part of
right,
the
yeah,
Trans
that
Am.
section. That yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, I don't have as many freeing memories from that section, but same idea. Yeah, geographically the same idea.
Yeah, same area.
Biking through the Lolo National Forest was amazing though. Just want to add that. But
Yeah.
I like distinctly
Really
remember
magical.
it being, yeah.
I
But
would
I
say,
guess to also answer, oh, sorry, go ahead, Natalie.
oh, you go. You're already talking.
I think for me, on the Trans Am, uh, so I went westward, and when I caught the first hazy glimpse of the Rockies, getting into Colorado, like after having come into Colorado, that was probably not only one of the best experiences cycling, but probably one of the best like in my life. It just felt very I don't know, just expansive. And just recall that I was reflecting a lot about like my family. So it was just, yeah, it was a really a very freeing moment, I think, for me. But frankly, most of the time cycling feels really freeing anyway, which I guess I feel kind of fortunate to be able to say that. But I feel like anytime I commuted to work on my bike, generally speaking, that always felt just freeing, and particularly because I felt like I was always in a better mood than everybody that was in their car. So
You'd be happier biking, as the war on cars would say. For me, probably the most freeing I've ever felt was like cycling down from like San Antonio de los Cobres in northern Argentina. So I get 4,300 meters, and you have, I think, like 80 or 90 kilometers of uninterrupted downhill, like 3,000 meters of descent, just winding roads. And the first half of that was phenomenal. Like not touching the brakes, just leaning in. If you need to like slow down, sit up a bit more. And it's just so remote. There's no other traffic, and it's beautifully paved. And it was only the first half that was good, because when I got down to this grand open canyon, the wind was now coming up the mountain, and I had to drop it down into the lowest of the low gears just to go down like a 9% grade. And I almost contemplated going back up the Andes. So the first half was great. But yeah, that was probably where I live when it's just luscious and green and beautiful, fast.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for participating in this. I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna be sharing like a recording of it in the coming week or so. Yeah.
Thank you, Annalisa, for organizing, and thanks so much to Laura for facilitating and writing the article that sparked this conversation.
And like,
yeah,
thank you
same. Thank you
for
both.
having all of us on here so we could just connect, like meeting these like rad people.